Welcome to the next in our professional services industry podcast series. I'm Scott Duda, an audit partner with Cherry Bekaert. I lead our professional services industry group, and we're here today to talk about cybersecurity and professional service firms. And with me is Steve Ursillo to talk about some of the things that we've been seeing in the space. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Scott, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So Scott kind of reiterated there, my name's Steve Ursillo. I'm a partner here at Cherry Bekaert, part of the risk assurance and advisory group, risk accounting and advisory, and I'm specifically involved in the information assurance and cybersecurity group. I'm one of the leaders and head up the information assurance practice area as well as the offensive security practice area. So we provide an array of different types of services from assurance, information assurance, SOC, high trust, HIPAA compliance, CMMC, NIST, ISO, and a whole bunch of what I would call alphabet soup there as it pertains to your cyber and privacy governance risk objectives. In addition to other privacy and data management security attestations or certifications, we also get involved in doing a fair amount of cyber and privacy risk management advisory services. So we help organizations build out and design their governance and their risk management programs. We help them evaluate those programs, and we provide an array of different types of technical advisory services to help them fulfill those initiatives. It's all part of what we would do for a comprehensive offering. So thanks again.
Yep. So, Steve, I know we've heard a bunch in the news. You're always seeing different hacks. There's been a number of them that have been fairly significant over the recent months. I know just from a client perspective, we've had a number of folks bring us in, some preemptively and then some maybe after the fact. What are some of the current threats that people are seeing in the professional services industry?
Yeah, so the persistent rise in sophisticated cyber threats, just continues to draw attention to business owners, professional advisors, regulators, investors, and other key stakeholders. Attacks like ransomware attacks, business email compromise, and corporate account takeovers, credential attacks, supply chain attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, and other forms of system compromises are consistently highlighted in the news media, which draws even more attention. So the cyber threat advisories, are persistently exploring new and creative ways to monetize data, execute different types of financial fraud, disrupt organizations' business commitments, service level commitments, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, it's been a moving target and difficult for many organizations to navigate. Unfortunately, defending against these attacks is definitely not a trivial task, even for organizations with a very mature cyber defensive program. So, it becomes something that is definitely not set and forget. Organizations continue to have to evolve, stay on top of the emerging threats, and do what they can to really mitigate their risk. Some of the deeper dives of things we're seeing, I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but, ransomware attacks are pretty significant. So data being encrypted by adversaries and held for ransom, really disrupts operations, makes it very difficult for them to do what they need to do to, provide services to their clients. In addition, there's usually there's not only the ransom aspect of it, but if you don't pay the ransom, there's the threat of disclosing it on the public domain or them coming back and the adversaries basically providing some type of a denial of service if you don't pay. In addition, if organizations are considering paying, which is not the recommended route, but it's a business decision, but if they do, there could be implications for paying because, those particular countries may not be countries at which we're allowed to pay based on the fact that they are threats, national threats to us. In addition, we're seeing a lot of attacks through phishing and social engineering, attackers finding ways to trick folks and have them click on malicious URLs. Now with technologies emerging from AI, and you have these deep fakes and other types of audio and video fakes, it's making it even harder for people to really truly evaluate what's real and what's not. In addition, there's a number of different types of credential attacks out there, from stealing it through a phishing exercise or, attacking a system and dumping credentials, doing some type of a brute force attack, or even just really spraying with common passwords across accounts. They could be using malware for keyloggers, and they could also be taking credentials off the dark net that have been used in other areas and then using them on some of the major service providers. So those are things that we see. There's insider threats, folks that have a malicious intent that may be stealing information. And then there's also folks that may do it inadvertently. So they give up information just unintentionally through a mistake or lack of training. So those are other areas that become concern. Supply chain attacks are definitely something that continues to be a problem because we have these trusted expectations between third parties, customers, vendors, so on and so forth. And if they get attacked and the systems are interconnected, the attack kind of traverses into those environments. And then there's organizations as they continue to evolve and adopt cloud technologies into their operational profiles. They potentially will have misconfigured systems and systems that are allowing for data access in areas where they're not supposed to. So, as organizations kind of evolve with the technology area and the threat landscape, they have to look at these emerging technologies, AI, the Internet of Things, blockchain, constantly staying on top of those risks, incorporating that in the risk assessment and trying to do the best they can for those protection areas.
So a lot of what you talked about there really is applicable across many different industries, whether it's industrial, technology, you name it. But why is managing cybersecurity risks so important for professional service organizations in particular?
So, that's a great point. It's definitely cybersecurity doesn't discriminate. And I think it does. It's really industry agnostic. However, when you think about professional services, most professional service organizations are trusted advisors. They're providing an element of services that usually combines people, process, and technology. They have access to very sensitive information, personal information, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to try to protect that information. When you think about all the different types of services that are provided, there's legal and regulatory consequences if there's a breach. Making sure that information is safeguarded to preserve the trust and the reputation of the business and the work that you've done on behalf of your clients. Making sure that any private data that you have is held sacred and protected to make sure that there's no privacy breaches that affect individuals or the folks out there that are directly impacted by those identity theft measures and things like that. And in many cases, as a professional service organization, the quality and timeliness of the information that you provide becomes critical to many organizations' really business objectives. So making sure that you have the continuity of the operations, the safeguarding of that data. If not, that can certainly have an impact on the professional service organization's financial stability. It could certainly have an impact on a competitive advantage that you have. If there is a problem, then obviously your reputation and any type of professional advantage that you'd have would be at stake. And again, this traverses not only just a technical risk, but it presents personal risk and business risk to many of these organizations.
Right. So those cyber threats, they can affect the overall well-being and operational integrity of those professional services firms, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you think about it, like I said, the reputation is going to be really, really important for these organizations to make sure that they are protecting that. And any type of significant breach could lead to financial loss, reputational damage, legal repercussions. It really could impair that trust and have an impact on their business operation. So it's certainly something that organizations have to factor in through their risk assessment process, the decisions that they make, the people they work with, the providers that they work with, understanding what implication that could have on their business and the timeliness of the disclosure requirements that they have, depending on where they operate, to make sure that they are staying within the confines of both legal and regulatory expectations.
So what types of measures should professional service firms use to implement to reduce their risk to these cyber threats?
In many cases, when it comes to an organization managing risk, you got to think about an effective cyber risk management program. That's going to help protect their information. It's going to keep them in good grace with the compliance and regulatory initiatives that they have, and it's going to ensure the continuity and the reliability of their services. So, organizations will want to consider a number of different things, and there is really no one magic bullet, so to speak. It's really a combination of defense and depth here, but they'll want to establish a strong cyber governance program. with all the appropriate policies and procedures to reinforce that. Typically, that's reinforced by a good risk assessment and making sure that they've thought about both the inherent risks and the different types of cyber risks and anything else that can have an impact to all the different things that we talked about earlier in the podcast here. They need to understand what type of data they have and what protection it needs to have. So there's certain protection mechanisms and expectations around private data versus confidential data versus if you have data that is maybe government contracting information that's controlled unclassified data, or you have federal contract information that also has certain types of protections. You have healthcare data. So the point there is the different type of data that you have is going to prescribe ways in which you need to protect it. So you need to understand where that resides, both within your footprint of your technology systems themselves, plus any third parties or cloud providers that you're using or anybody that you're doing business with. So understanding the type of data, where it resides, the boundaries of that data within your organization, how it's stored, processed, and transmitted throughout the organization. If you don't know what you have, you can't really protect it. Then you design your program really around that data. You make sure that you have all the applicable risks identified. You identify the right controls in order to mitigate any threats or risks against the loss of that data. And then you're going to want to reinforce that through the right investments and protection mechanisms. And you design that program with the proper safeguards to protect the assets at the appropriate level. You'll want to evaluate and monitor the effectiveness of that program on a regular basis. So once again, you don't set it and forget it. You want to make sure that you have a program to monitor that, the effectiveness of it, and then obviously bring that into the appropriate level so that it meets leadership's risk appetite and, of course, measures up against your fiduciary responsibilities to your clients. Some of the things that you may want to consider there could be employee training and awareness. Again, implementation of those security policies, making sure that you have the right threat detection and threat intelligence, making sure your incident response program is sound. It's really important to make sure that you're prepared for a breach and that you can respond accordingly in the timetable that's expected for a lot of the regulatory and legal expectations out there, depending on the type of data. You'll want to make sure that you're enforcing strong identity and access management. You're going to want to make sure that you're providing regular backups, and you're also thinking about your vendor management program. Ultimately, a culmination of a lot of these steps is going to enforce that type of depth that you need in order to safeguard that information on behalf of your clients and, once again, your leaders.
So where do you and your team step in there across all of that sort of journey, working against these threats? How do you and your team step in and help professional services organizations identify those areas where they want to make improvements, implement those steps and that? How do you all help them through that process?
Yeah, so our information assurance and cybersecurity group, as I had stated earlier in the intro, gets involved in a large area in the subject matter here in protecting and safeguarding data. We're brought in to provide assurance for organizations that may already have folks that are operationally and tactically executing on this. So we come in and do the certifications or the attestations to provide assurance to either key stakeholders, leadership, board of directors, or even third parties through the use of SOC reports and other types of certifications, so that third parties get a comfort level over the vendor risk management processes and what risk it has, whether it's financial or operational. So we help out there. That's a big part of what we do. And on the advisory side, organizations will hire us to basically evaluate their programs and really help augment them or take control in the standpoint of helping them in a managed service capacity to help them, once again, build out what they need based on those different types of risks. So we'll help them build, design, and evaluate that program. We will conduct or monitor their risk assessment processes. We'll get involved in actually helping on some of the technical execution. So our teams will provide vulnerability and pen testing services, penetration testing services, otherwise known as red teaming, where we're hired to engage to try to break in or circumvent controls and then present effective ways in which you could manage the risk of that happening from a third party or an adversary out there. We get involved in helping organizations build out their cyber and their incident response programs, providing breach coaching. I mean, in many cases, because the timelines for reporting a breach are pretty stringent, depending on the state and the type of data that you have, and whether you're operating nationally or internationally. It really requires pretty prescriptive run books and exercises and a culmination of different teams to approach and effectively executing those programs. So we will help organizations design those programs, test them, make sure that they're adequate, and make sure that they're able to operationalize on the reporting structure they need in the event that they have a breach. We also help out in cyber diligence measures. So our transaction advisory teams get involved in helping for different types of due diligence, whether it's tax, financial, technology, so on and so forth. But we complement that with cyber diligence. So we go out and look at organizations to make sure that if there's any type of investment or transaction process, that the key stakeholders, investors, have taken a look at the footprint to make sure that their cybersecurity measures are where they need to be. They're at a point where there doesn't present any additional risk to a particular transaction, and if so, what's really the overall need for mitigation and remediation, and how does that affect any type of transaction down the future? In addition, third-party risk management evaluations that we'll do, helping organizations evaluate their supply chain. That's a big part of where we get involved. And of course, security awareness training. So just making sure that the folks that have access to this information are in a position where they are getting the latest and greatest for the different types of threats out there, things to look for, and how they can best mitigate to protect the organization. And in certain cases, like I said, if the organization is short in resources and they need some support, we will couple managed service offerings to help augment the teams to execute on a lot of those objectives.
Very cool. I love the stuff that y'all do. So I think it's very obvious how important a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity is these days. You mentioned artificial intelligence, and with the improvements that we continue to see there, I think these threats are just going to become more and more challenging for us all to identify. Appreciate you and your team providing all the expert assistance you do to manage those threats for our clients and those in our network. Really appreciate your time today. For those of you listening, our contact information can be accessed where you access the podcast. We look forward to hearing from you and look forward to becoming your guide forward.